There we go. All righty, so I have just it's been so much fun digging into this. I actually bought another book last night, and I told you where we were going to be at tonight, but I keep running into rabbit holes. So we're going to go down another rabbit hole this evening. And I should rename this series Mining the Bible, because I feel like we keep going down new paths, but they're very interesting. I think you're going to find some cool stuff. So we've been talking about the days of Noah. It's our third one. Now, what you have is last week's handouts, and a couple of y'all may not have those. Here's last week's, so we can get those for y'all afterwards, because I'm doing them a week after I teach, because sometimes we don't get to everything, or I rearrange things when I look back through it. But we've been talking about the days of Noah because Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be when the coming of the Son of Man. So he's telling us what it's going to be like when Jesus returns. So this is Matthew 24, and Jesus said this, Matthew 24, he says, now concerning that day and hour no one knows. Again, we said, the Feast of Trumpets, which is the next feast, is also called the Feast Nobody Knows. So when he said that phrase, I think a lot of the Jewish people thought, Feast of Trumpets, I've heard that phrase somewhere before. But again, nobody knows the day or the hour. Neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. Again, when Jesus was here, he self-limited himself. Paul talks about that in Philippians chapter 2. So he limited his knowledge. That's hard for us to understand, but in his humanness, he did not know at that point. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days, before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. So again, we ask this question, and that was, why the days of Noah? That was the question we asked. And so let's just take a look at that for just a second. Again, I'm just going to review what the days of Noah were like. And then we're going to dive into this. It says, when mankind began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took them any as they chose for wives for themselves. The Lord said, my spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward. When the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind who bore children to them, these were the powerful men of old, the famous men. When the Lord saw that human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every inclination of the human mind was nothing but evil all the time, the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was deeply grieved. Then the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I created off the face of the earth, together with the animals and creatures that crawl and the birds of the sky, for I regretted that I made them. Noah, however, found favor with the Lord. And then he says this, these are the family records of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries. We talked about that last week. Noah walked with God, and Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. The earth was filled with wickedness. God saw how corrupt the earth was, for every creature had corrupted its way on the earth. Then God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to every creature, for the earth is filled with wickedness because of them. Therefore, I am going to destroy them along with the earth. So, what we looked at was, okay, what were the characteristics of Noah's day? This is kind of review, that were so bad that God had to destroy the whole mankind in those days. And so we walked down this list, and we saw that we keep seeing over and over again humanity was corrupt, or wicked, or evil, over and over. Verse 3, they were corrupt. Verse 5, wickedness was widespread. Verse 5, every inclination of the human mind was nothing but evil all the time. Verse 11, the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with wickedness. Verse 12, God saw how corrupt the earth was. Verse 12 again, the earth was filled with wickedness because of them. So over and over and over again, verse 13, for the earth was filled with wickedness because of them. So we kept seeing over and over in the days of Noah, the earth is corrupt, 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 wicked, wicked, wicked. And again, the question was, why was the earth so corrupt and so wicked as opposed to any other time in history? Wouldn't you say the earth's pretty corrupt and wicked now? I would. You could even argue that today it's more corrupt and wicked than ever because of social media and because of media and all the things that we have. I mean, we've invented new ways to sin, quite frankly. We've invented better ways to kill ourselves. You know, China flew a supersonic, hypersonic missile across the United States recently, and that has totally freaked out our State Department, which should be on top of this, because in the past we never expected China could reach us, and all of our, as I understand it, missile defenses are pointed to the north, expecting the attack would come from Russia. This came from the south, which means China can now hit us with a hypersonic missile with nuclear warheads, and we are not really prepared for that. I don't know if you saw that mainstream media, but you can research that. And so now, and I'm going to tell you that China is going to rise and is rising as a major superpower. And we will, they are extremely a threat. And when you read about the Gog and Magog war, you have the East. China is involved in that. So I'm just telling you, China is going to be center stage on the world stage. And they're closing themselves off from other countries. You know, my wife works teaching people international languages. There's another, or English. There's another company called VIP Kids that specifically worked with Chinese children. China has since said, you can't do this anymore. We don't want our children exposed to Western influences like that. So they are in the process of kind of locking down their citizenry and at the same time ramping up their nuclear stockpile right now. And, you know, they are making overtures about Taiwan. And we may find ourselves, you know, Taiwan's our ally. And so I wouldn't be surprised if China does something. And I hate to say that. I hope I'm wrong. But we could find ourselves in a real situation right now with that whole thing. And China holds a lot of our debt, by the way, in America. So if they pull their debt card, they could immediately cripple us. So we're in a vulnerable situation. And again, I don't really believe the United States is an end times player. For various reasons, we don't really see it in the Bible. Now, I'm not trying to tell you to be scared. I'm just telling you what we see in prophecy is happening in front of us. But I digress. The question is, what made the world, earth, so corrupt and so wicked as opposed to any other time in history? And we said there were several hypotheses that these sons of God, some people say they were Seth, the line of Seth. There is no biblical support of that. That comes out of our good old friend Augustine, who I believe more and more just thoroughly messed up Christianity in a lot of ways. Others said these were rulers that married to common folks. Again, nothing biblically. I came down on the hypothesis that these were angels, fallen angels that married human women. Again, the objection has always been Mark, where Jesus said that when people rise from the dead, they're neither married nor given in marriage. But again, if you just walk through this, this is easily refuted because Jesus is talking about after the physical resurrection. Genesis 6 is before anybody dies. The locations in Genesis 6, if those sons of God are angels, which every time we see that phrase, sons of God, in Job and in the Old Testament, it's always angels. So Genesis 6 happens on earth. Jesus is talking about something that happens in heaven. So when you compare the two, the time frames aren't the same, the locations aren't the same, and the terminology is actually different. Jesus talks about angels in heaven. Job in Genesis talks about the sons of God being what we believe would be angels, and most definitely fallen angels. So I don't think it works. Now, it's interesting this week. I, of course, was reading and watching videos, and I ran across this on YouTube. All right, now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I believe that we are gearing up, so when the rapture happens, one of the explanations for why millions of people have disappeared is going to be aliens. To be honest, I really think that's going to be one of the explanations. Aliens. We don't know what happened to all these people, but they were probably sucked up like aliens, okay, from aliens. I ran across this video. It's by the History Channel, which obviously is not Christian. So they're going to talk about evolution, which I flatly would reject, and they're going to talk about aliens. But if you listen, I think what they're describing is what we've been talking about. There was another race of people on the earth, and scientists now are arguing for that. Annika, I think it's on the video. You have to drag the screen across or something for them to see it down here. Or I can show it on this video camera thing. I don't know how you want to do that. So, because my PowerPoint's not hooked into yours. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. If you click on the link up there, it should, or I have the YouTube channel opened on another page.
The Arthurian people,
But you'll
the
have to
Indian
drag it
people,
over.
and the Syrian people came to this world to teach
do that
and
real
give
quickly for her.
humans the
I
key
didn't give her
to open your
a
eyes
lesson on how to do it.
within.
Leipzig, Germany, 2000.
All right. Yeah, you just have to grab it at the top here. Just grab it like that and drag it over. And then once it gets through playing, we'll have to drag it back.
So we can't make it big from that.
Well, we can if we can get our mouse on it. Right there. All right. And then afterwards, we'll have to drag it back. So watch this. I thought this was interesting.
2010. Biologists, led by Svante Pabo of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, make a stunning announcement. They have determined that early humans not only coexisted on Earth with other more primitive hominids, they also mated with them. But even more astonishing was their finding that another, as yet unidentified species, may also be represented in human DNA.
Up until now, most people have been familiar with the typical DNA model of human evolution, in which you have a very nicely defined progression from previous types of human or hominid life up to anatomically modern humans. That's not true anymore. And what we're seeing is evidence that there could have been interbreeding with what the actual mainstream media is calling mystery species of humans. An anthropologist from the University of Wisconsin, Dr. John Hawkes, did a comprehensive analysis of human DNA going back for many thousands of years. And what he found was astonishing. If you look at the DNA from someone in 3000 BC, and you compare that to the DNA of someone alive today, it has changed by 7%.
Mapping the human genome, Dr. Hawkes found that in the past 5,000 years, our DNA has evolved at a rate 100 times greater than any previous 5,000-year period in our history.
So what happened in the last 5,000 years that altered the structure of human DNA by 7%? Is it possible that extraterrestrial humans interbred with us sometime in the last 5,000 years, and that could account for these monumental changes in the structure of human DNA?
Could it be that our ancestors are not only hominids who lived here on Earth, but also beings from beyond our world? Ancient astronaut theorists claim that evidence of this can be found in stories throughout history that depict humans mating with gods.
Throughout world cultures and mythologies, this idea of otherworldly beings, gods, supernatural beings, demons, having sex with humans is very, very common. The way that we interpret that experience depends on the cultural and religious factors around us.
We can read about these accounts of all sorts of weird beings who had their way with humans. Now, all we have to do is to approach these stories and look at them from a modern perspective, to eliminate the always suggested symbolism and look at these events for what they potentially really were: encounters with extraterrestrials.
There is abundant, undeniable evidence of human and extraterrestrial interbreeding. It's in so many different cultures that to suggest that it's all a conspiracy theory or a myth or a fantasy is completely illogical.
Alien angels that came and bred with.
Brace yourself. What would you do if you went down out here?
You wouldn't want to go down.
It's actually a pretty good movie, Dune. Just came out. I watched it Saturday night. Pretty good movie. Anyways, but the bottom line is, I don't. They call it extraterrestrial beings. I would say it was the sons of God that mated with human people, and I think that is supported here in Scripture. So we'll put that PowerPoint up there. I don't know. Andy, because she's having to drag it from there. Working on it. Hey, that's getting hungry. Do what? I see it, but she has to drag the cursor and it's not playing well. Hang on just a second. Maybe I'll find it. Okay, I'll get it. Hang on. Did you get it? Oh. That's all right. It's hard to do.
There it is. It's just.
I wonder if we can do this.
Oh, I hit escape and got it.
Okay.
I got now.
Just.
Where do I take it?
I guess just drag it back over here. Maybe that'll work. And then when we. Yeah. Then I've got some other videos to show.
Okay, I went.
That's okay. All right. I'll have to figure out a better way to do this. All right. So I found that very interesting. So, all right. Now, we talked last week, we looked at this book called First Enoch. If you weren't here last week, that is a book that was written somewhere between the Old Testament and New Testament time. And it gives us a lot of story about the Nephilim. And I want to read this real quickly, not all of it, because we got something new we're going to do tonight. But I think it gives us an account here. And it says, and they were all 200 who descended, and then it's talking about the sons of God here, these fallen angels. We're just going to jump into it. And they were all 200 who descended in the days of Jared in the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual curses on the act. Okay, now, just so you'll know, Mount Hermon is the highest mountain in ancient Israel. It's about 9,000 feet high, okay, above sea level. And it's also where the Jordan River begins. Hear about the Jordan River? It begins on Mount Hermon. Now, this week, I don't know why, but as I was just doing stuff, I saw a couple things about Mount Hermon pop up, and I thought, and I remembered that Enoch story there, and I thought, I'm going to run this rabbit. So this is going to be fun. Watch this. So according to First Enoch, these fallen angels came down on Mount Hermon, and that's where they decided then they would go out and marry the daughters of men. So I want to put a couple of things up here. This is a map. You may not be able to see it, but Mount Hermon is right up there at the top. You can see that kind of gray area up there, or on the screen here you can see it. And then right below it you'll see the city of Caesarea Philippi. And then you'll notice it's in an area called Bashan, or Bashan. So a couple things. The name actually means, it has a dual meaning. It can mean sacred place, or it also is known as the forbidden place. So it's kind of interesting. It has a dual meaning. Geographically, it's in the area, like I said, of Bashan. Have you all heard about Golan Heights today? And when you hear about Israel and the Golan Heights, and they got it, okay, this is the Golan Heights. Okay? The most famous city you've probably heard of in the New Testament is Caesarea Philippi. Y'all may have heard that story of Jesus visits Caesarea Philippi. Interestingly, it was the tribes of Israel when they settled in this area. It was the limit of the tribe of Manasseh. in Joshua originally, but later the tribe of Dan relocated to this area, and that's a whole interesting story. We'll talk about that maybe tonight. So there's a kind of a bigger map there. You can see Bashan. Here's the Sea of Galilee. Of course, the Jordan River comes from this area, and then there's Caesarea Philippi and Mount Hermon. So just real quickly, and we'll get back to this in a minute, it's very interesting. Jesus, most of his ministry was down here. But there is one time he travels to Caesarea Philippi, so he goes way out of his way to go up here. Now we're going to look at that story because I think there's a reason for that. Because supposedly, at least according to 1 Enoch, this is where the fallen angels descended to then go out and infiltrate and corrupt humanity. But Jesus is going to make an out-of-the-way trip all the way up here to do something, and we'll take a look at it in just a minute. I think there might be a reason for that. So, again, it's the northeastern border of Israel, and it's also on the border between Syria and Lebanon today. And it also marked the northern limits of the promised land that was conquered by Joshua. So this was the furthest they went. Okay? It was also, like I said, the half tribe of Manasseh, and we said that earlier. Now, it's kind of interesting, and we'll probably talk about this more, but Moses actually defeated Og, the king of Bashan there, before being prohibited from crossing the Jordan River for the Promised Land. So one of the last things Moses did was defeat the king of Og, and we'll hear more about this guy later, because this guy is probably a Nephilim. We'll hear about King Og later. And when they've excavated there on Mount Hermon, they have found a lot of ancient sanctuaries there on its peaks and its slope, and this is where they worshipped Baal. Okay, and the Amorites were in this area. In fact, I wanted to talk about this for just a second. So, real quickly, trying to do two things at once. So they have found over 20 pagan temples on Mount Hermon. Huh? If you want to, if you can do both. Okay, I'll let you click along. So they found over 20 pagan temples, and one of the gods you've heard of is Baal, right, who was worshipped in the Old Testament. And in Baal worship, the higher you could go, the more holier it was. So a lot of Baal worship was on Mount Hermon because it was the highest and therefore considered the holiest. And the word Baal simply means Lord or Master or Ruler. And basically, though, Baal kind of became the semi-technical term for all the gods of that area, of the Canaanites, okay? And according to Canaanite mythology, just to kind of give you a little bit of their mythology, Baal was the son of El, okay? That word meaning God there, the chief God. Of course, we also know God as El Elyon, El Adonai, El Shaddai, okay? So the God who provides, the God who sees, all those things. He was also Asherah, was the goddess of the sea. She's related to Baal as well in their mythology. Baal was considered to be the most powerful of all the gods, so he later eclipsed El, and then he was, in the other mythology, he defeated Yam, the god of the sea, and all that stuff. We won't get into all that. But his sister and cohorts were Ashereth. You've probably heard of those Asherah poles that they would set up. And so the Canaanites worshiped Baal. They also considered him the fertility god, and who provided children. And a lot of times in their worship, there was a lot of sensuality and ritualistic prostitution that they would do. You'd have temple prostitutes. Sometimes they would even offer humans to Baal on this. So it's a really wicked religion, okay? And this all started and originated on Mount Hermon. This was the high point of Baal worship, okay? Interesting. That's where the sons of God supposedly came down to corrupt the human race. That was also the same place that the Baal worshipers considered their highest and holiest place. Interesting. Now, when you get out of the Old Testament and you go between the Old Testament and New Testament, what's called the intertestamental period, that area morphed from Baal to Banis, and it's often known as the Greek god Pan. And basically, Pan means all. Have you ever heard of pantheism? Means God is in all, like God's in this stand right here. All gods, all life. Banus was a lusty, half-human, half-goat, flute-playing god. By the way, Peter Pan has a little bit of origins in Banus, apparently. And so there, in this same area, in Mount Hermon, later they started worshiping Pan, the god Pan, or Banus, in this same area there as well. Again, and also they considered this area, and this is kind of a picture, they considered this area, Mount Hermon, to be, there's some caves there in Caesarea Philippi, and they considered that to be the gateway to Hades, the pagans, to the underworld. Now, when we get into the New Testament period, Banus was destroyed, and Herod Philip rebuilt Banus, and he renamed it after himself because he was a very humble guy, called it Caesarea Philippi. Okay? Now, even though he rebuilt the city and renamed it, they still focused on worshiping the Greek gods, Banus, and there's a cliff that stood above the city, and people built shrines to the god Pan there. And again, this cave there, they felt like was the entrance to the underworld. And they believed that the fertility gods lived there during the winter, and they would do all sorts of detestable acts to worship these false gods. So that brings us to Jesus. Just kind of so that you know the background of Mount Hermon. So supposedly the place where, and I say supposedly, First Enoc's not in the Bible, it's not canon, but yet it seems to fill out a lot of details. That supposedly that's the place where the fallen angels came down to then go out and corrupt the earth. It's also the place where Baal worship was originated from and was the highest place. It was also a place where Banus, this god Pan, was worshiping. It was also the place that during Jesus' day they were worshiping Pan and all that. So it's kind of interesting because Jesus actually goes to this area because Caesarea Philippi was right there at the foot of Mount Hermon. And guess what happened at Caesarea Philippi? Jesus took his disciples. I showed you it was way out of the way where Jesus normally was at. He's usually around Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, but he makes this long trip north, all the way up there to the base of Mount Hermon, and it's there where he asks his disciples the question, "Who do you say I am?" Why do you think he made the trip all the way to Caesarea Philippi to ask that question? Why do you think that Jesus waited to get all the way up there to ask his disciples that question? Now, one argument is, well, he did it just to get away from the crowds. You know, they were on a little R&R time. If that's the place where the sons of God came to go out and corrupt humanity, I think Jesus, as the Son of God, is going to that very same spot. And he's going to say, y'all failed. Here I am. At least that would be my contention. Matthew 16, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But you," he asked them, "who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responded, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I will say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." This is very interesting. Look at this next phrase. "And the gates of Hades will not overpower it." Jesus is in Caesarea Philippi. It's there that the cave is where they believe is the gateway to hell. He says that phrase where people believe is the gateway to hell. And he says, "I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on the earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he gave his disciples orders to tell no one that he was the Messiah. So, again, just to recap, Jesus asked this question at the location where fallen angels were supposedly have ascended to go to the daughters of men and corrupt the earth. It was the location that pagans considered the gateway to the underworld. And Jesus announces at this he goes out of his way all the way up to this location, and he announces his church. This is the first time he uses the word church. I will build my church. And he also says right there, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, at the very place where they consider to be the gates of hell. See, Jesus didn't do anything willy-nilly. But see, a lot of times we wouldn't know that, right? And, you don't think about that. But there was reasons he did what he did. I think this is fascinating. Now, what's really interesting is Matthew 17. It says, after 6 days, and I believe Jesus was probably still in Caesarea Philippi. It says he took Peter, James, and his brother John and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what mountain. Some people say it was Mount Tabor, that he went back down to Galilee and he did it there. Some believe it was on Mount of Olives. I believe he was still in Caesarea Philippi because Matthew says he went up on a high mountain, and this was the highest mountain. And he was transfigured in front of them, and his face shone like the sun, his clothes became as white as light. Suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared to him, talking to him. Then Peter said to Jesus, it's good for us to be here. If you want, I will set up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Of course, Peter was always known for putting his foot in his mouth. I believe, this is debated. All right, I'm not going to die on this hill or on this mountain, since we're talking about mountains. But I'm trying to feel if I was awake. I believe it's very possible this was on Mount Hermon. Because it was only 6 days later. It was also called a high mountain. And the reason is what would be the significance of Jesus having the transfiguration on Mount Hermon? Because it would have been on the very mountain where the fallen angels were said to have descended and start the corruption of men. And God himself, Jesus, is going to that same spot and saying, no, you didn't succeed. I am here. I am the Messiah, and I'm building my church, and the gates of hell are not going to prevail against it. And the disciples, it was there, understood when Jesus was going off the mountain and talking to them, it's where they finally got it that John the Baptist was the forerunner of the Messiah. And it was when they came off the mountain that Jesus tells them, I'm going to be crucified. And it's there that he announces what's coming up to his disciples. I believe Jesus went there to stick his finger in Satan's eye and to say, I'm going to be victorious. I don't know. What, any thoughts on that? I found it interesting. Because again, my argument is the reason these fallen angels came to the earth was at that point, back in Genesis, of course, the books had not been written, the Torah, but Satan was there in the Garden of Eden when God said, there's going to be a male, seed of the woman, who's going to crush your head. And I believe Satan did everything he could to corrupt humanity so that couldn't happen. And now fast forward 3,000 some odd years later, Jesus goes to the very same place where Satan started it all and said, I've won. You're not stopping it. I don't know. Maybe y'all don't see that, but to me it's fascinating. Any thoughts? Does it give a little bit more depth possibly to the story? Huh? Yeah, to me it gives more depth to what's going on. And again, I argue that Jesus never said anything unintentionally, and he never did anything unintentionally. There was always a reason for everything he said and everything he did. And I would argue, and I'm becoming more convinced of it, we don't see it on the other side of the world 2,000 years later. But maybe the Jesus followers who thought about it, because they would have known the book of Enoch. We know Jude knew it. We knew Peter knew it because they both refer to it. When they probably sat down and talked about it, I'm sure a lot of them was like, wait a minute. I see what he did here. He's proclaiming his victory. Now, there's some more interesting things about Mount Hermon, and I misspelled it there. Sorry, it's Hermon, Mount Hermon. And the tribe of Dan. This is fascinating too. And this is Bible prophecy. You might find this fascinating. So y'all know there's 12 tribes of Israel. We've heard of that. There's several lists of the 12 tribes of Israel. Some of them vary a little bit. Some will have, Manasseh and Ephraim. Some will say tribe of Joseph and drop one of them. But there's always this list of 12. Sometimes they'll leave Levi out, but they always have 12. But this is very interesting. So Joshua goes in to conquer the promised land, okay, known as Canaan, right? Y'all know that? Okay. And so, again, if you may not be able to see it on this map, but you see Bashan's right up here, okay? This is Manasseh. This would be Mount Hermon right up here. Now, when Joshua allocated the land to the 12 tribes, Dan, not the Dan we know and love, but Dan was down here. He had this nice coastal region right next door to Ephraim. Of course, Benjamin, Judah, everybody. Here's the Philistines. Okay, Dan was right down here. Now, this is very interesting. The seventh lot came out for the tribe of Dan, descendants by their clans. The territory of their inheritance included Zorah, Ascalon, all these places, cities I can't pronounce. Okay, and then it says, verse 47, when the territory of the descendants of Dan slipped out of their control. What? They went up and fought against Lasham, captured it, and struck it down with the sword. So they took possession of it and lived there and renamed Lasham after their ancestor Dan. This was the inheritance of the tribe of Dan's descendants by their clans, these cities with their settlements. Now, Joshua tells us, we see in Joshua something that happened later. What in the world is he talking about? You mean they lost this? Actually, they did. If you go later to the book of Judges, chapter 18, and we're not going to read through the whole chapter, but you've probably read this story. Of course, let me just pick it up. We're going to skip through it, but again, this has prophetic interest. Look at this. In these days, there was no king in Israel, and the Danite tribe was looking for territory to occupy. Remember, Joshua talked about when it slipped away, so they lost the territory. Okay, and you can go back and research why. Up to that time, no territory had been captured by them among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent out 5 brave men from all their clans, from Zorah to Escatol, and scout out the land and explore it. And they told them, go and explore the land. They came to the hill country of Ephraim as far as the house of Micah and spent the night there. And you probably know the story. Micah had these gods and all this stuff. And we're just going to skip down to verse 27. After they had taken the gods Micah had made and the priests that belonged to them, they went to Laish. That's another spelling for what we saw earlier in Joshua. To a quiet, unsuspecting people, they killed them with their swords and burned the city. There was no one to rescue them because it was far from Sidon and had no alliance with anyone. It was in a valley that belonged to Beth Rohab. They rebuilt the city and lived in it. They named the city Dan after the name of their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel. The city was formerly named Laish. So different spelling here, but it was the same city here. So what they did was they relocated from down here where they were originally. During the time of Judges, they lost this area. They went all the way up here. They defeated the people there in Laish, killed them all. They took these household gods of Micah, took him as their priest. Again, this is time of Judges. Everybody's being wicked. They go all the way up here. Now, guess where this is at? Mount Hermon area. Bashan. They go up to the very area where supposedly the fallen angels came to go out and corrupt humanity. And the Danites started worshiping Baal and the false gods of the Canaanites, okay, and Ashtoreth. Now, eventually we don't know what happened to them. They became part of the quote-unquote lost tribes. But it's interesting here when you look at prophecies about Dan. If you remember, back in Genesis 49, Jacob was about to die, and he blesses his sons, and he gives a prophecy. That's where we get Judah. He says, a scepter will not be taken out of your hand until he whose right it is comes and takes it. We look back and say that was the Messiah. Jesus came from the tribe of Judah. Okay, he was the king whose scepter it belonged to. It's interesting that when Jacob talks about Dan, he says this, Dan will be a snake by the road. Wouldn't it be great if your father said that about you? You're going to be a snake by the road. A viper beside the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider falls backwards. That's not a very nice prophecy about your son. But he's talking about the tribe of Dan, his descendants. Deuteronomy, Moses, before Moses dies, he gives a lot of prophecies about what's going to happen to the Israelites. And here's what Moses said about Dan. This is interesting. This is before Dan moves north. This is before they even go into the promised land and get their original location. This is before all that. He said about Dan, Dan is a young lion leaping out of Bashan. Now, this is before they went into the promised land, and originally they weren't in Bashan. So Moses is saying they're going to leap out of Bashan. What is he saying? Eventually you guys are going to be up there. This is a prophecy. Moses was a prophet. Okay? So he prophesied the relocation of Dan, and we're understanding Dan is not going to be a good tribe. Not going to be a good tribe. Jeremiah, who prophesied during the Babylonian captivity. So now fast forward many years later. Okay, we've had David and Solomon, the first temple rebuilt, second temple, the first temple rebuilt and then destroyed. Now they're in Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah is prophesying around that time, right before the Babylonian captivity. And he says this about Dan. From Dan, the snorting of horses is heard, the sound of neighing of mighty steeds. The whole land quakes. They come to devour the land and everything in it, the city and all of its residents. Now, what in the world is he talking about? It's very interesting that the early church theologians, at least Irenaeus and Hippolytus, said that they thought that the Antichrist will be somehow a part of the tribe of Dan. That somehow his lineage will go back to them. Now that's interesting. And what's really interesting is when you go to Revelation chapter 7, John gives us there were 144,000 Jews sealed. And he says from the tribe of this and from the tribe of this and from the tribe of this and the tribe of this. And he lists the tribes. But he leaves out the tribe of Dan. He inserts the tribe of Levi, which was sometimes left out. And he leaves out Dan, and he also leaves out Ephraim. And Dan and Ephraim, if you go back, there's a lot of correlation between Dan and Ephraim and what they did together as tribes. But what the fascinating thing is, there's multiple lists of the 12 tribes, but Revelation 7, it's the only list in which the tribe of Dan is not listed. Do you think it might have had something to do with the fact they went to Mount Hermon and their worship of false idols and their idolatry and what they did? And they don't have a place. And of course, some think it's going to be from that tribe that the Antichrist is going to ultimately arise in somehow. I'm not saying that's gospel. I'm just saying that's the thoughts of some of the early church leaders. Could it be that's why God doesn't mention them or list them as part of the 144,000 witnesses? All tied back to Mount Hermon. Hermon. Say it wrong. Hermon. I don't know. Do y'all find that interesting? I don't know. I find it interesting. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm a nerd. I just think that these things that we read in the Bible and we just read them, which is fine, but then if you stop and go down the rabbit hole, you realize, whoa, there's a lot of significance to this location. Now, let's bring it to end times. Let's bring it up today. So we know in the end that Dan is not going to be part of the 144,000. And I think it goes all the way back to what they did. This is another video. We're going to try this again, Annika. Or do you want me to show it down here? All right. I want to show you another video because let's bring it into today's context. Mount Hermon, as we're getting into end times, not only is, I believe, where the angels came down, fallen angels, not only where Jesus went to the base of it in Caesarea Philippi to proclaim his victory over Hades, and his church was going to be established there
Why doesn't every home in the U.S. have solar panels?
She's pulling it up. It's very interesting in today's content. I'm keeping that. She's earning her money tonight. It's very interesting. I got 2 videos, Annika, if we can work them both in. I want to show you how this location today is a huge player in our world. And so we'll see if she can do it. I might run up there and help her out. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry, we'll get this watch. So let me run up here. She's got it. She's figuring it out. There you go. Now if it's now it's hard because you keep going. There it is. Yep. All right.
Dan, a little bit hard to understand for someone like me who has a background in science and archaeology.
I don't know if that's the video I wanted to
look
show.
Look at this. You've got a father, a mother, and a child. The ancients didn't believe that these were actually their gods, but they believed that their pagan deities either sat on or their life force infiltrated these stones so that when they were about to enter the city, they could come here and leave food for them.
It should be called Why Mount Hermon is Called the Eyes of the State of Israel. There it is right there, I think. There it is. Now she's got it. Now, by the way, Mount Hermon today is a ski resort. So that's kind of fascinating. You were close. Go ahead and just turn it on, and we can see it from there well enough.
Look, a very strategic spot in Israel, right? The geographical location, a beautiful spot. You see people sledding, skiing behind us, but strategic. Tell us a bit more why this is such an important place for the state of Israel.
So Mount Hermon, as you said correctly, is a very strategic point here in Israel. It's the highest mountain in Israel. We nicknamed it the Eyes of the State. On a good day like this day, if we would be standing on the higher point at the military observations, we can see the beaches of Tel Aviv. That's how far you can see.
Wow.
Now, the place we're located is not just the highest place, we're on a tri-state border. When we're looking north and west, Lebanon. In back of us, east, is Syria, meaning we're sitting now at a key point between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. And whoever controls this mountain can see all northern Israel, can see the Golan Heights, and of course, it also gives you a lot of control into Lebanon.
Yeah, wow. And the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, have a pretty strong presence up here, right? Because of that reason, the eye of the state of Israel.
I would say the most sophisticated intelligence abilities the IDF has on ground are in the bases just behind us. Due to the strategic importance, we have here several, I would say a chain of strategic bases just here behind us, as you can see right there. And these bases have very high quality intelligence ability, radio abilities, and these guys are the eyes of Israel. They're protecting the Lebanese front and the Syrian front.
Yeah. Now, the Druze, a very important population here in the northern part of Israel. There are some very important Druze villages around us here on Mount Hermon. Tell us a bit more about
that. That's what I get for trying something different. But I think you can see that Mount Hermon is hugely important today. It's hugely important. And it's also a place where whoever controls Mount Hermon is going to have a very important thing here. I'm just going to do this on my video here, Annika, because I want you to see this is a cabinet minister who is giving a stern warning to the UN. Let me just say, the United Nations is not a friend of Israel. They are not a friend of Israel. And I just want you to see, I think this is it. He gives this very stern warning to them. What in the world is going on? Let me put this back up. Because one of the things that caught my eye was Mount Hermon is not only very strategic for Israel, but it's also the place where the UN has put an observatory up there. And it is, Mount Hermon is the globe's highest permanently manned United Nations position. And again, the United Nations is not a friend of Israel. And I believe the United Nations is basically going to be the leader of the world government in the end. They are, that's what they are. It's a world body. It's a world governmental body. And I think you're way ahead of me. Well, maybe not. I don't know where she started over. So anyways, they have established a permanent position up there on Mount Hermon. And I just want to show you this. I ran across this interesting message to the UN from one of the cabinet members of Israel, warning the UN to basically watch their step and leave them alone. And yeah, you'd have to keep going. Let me see if I can put this here on my computer if you all can see it. And I will, next time, Annika, I will download these videos and put them in the PowerPoint. I think that'll be much easier to do in the future. But if you can just turn on my iPad thing, I'll just play it over the iPad sound. Sorry, she's bouncing back and forth. I just wanted you to see this real quickly. All right, maybe not. Yeah, maybe you can't see it. I guess we're not going to see it. Okay. All right, well, anyways, silent video. Anyways, he's just giving a warning to the UN to watch your step and what you're wanting to do here on the Mount Hermon. So, all right, we'll forget about that tonight. All right, well, you know what? I totally messed up tonight, and I will make sure I download everything next week so I can have a flawless thing next week. So for those watching online, I apologize. We will get that fixed. That's my problem. All right, we still didn't understand what happened to Nephilim after the flood. But I just ran into this Mount Hermon thing this week, Hermon. I just thought it was fascinating because this is supposedly where the fallen angel came, and this is where Jesus later goes up and makes his announcement and pronouncement. All right, any thoughts before I totally messed up tonight? I hate it when that happens. My fault. Right. But the Bible says in Genesis 6:4, now you're going to make me do this. No, I don't care. I got more slides. I'm only at 45 of 77. It's whether or not you can stay awake. But Genesis 6:4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward. So there's a question. How did they make it out of the flood? Because later, if you remember, when the Israelites went into the promised land, or the spies, they said, we even saw Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch came from the Nephilim. To ourselves, we seem like grasshoppers, and we must have seemed the same to them. Now, some people I read said, well, they just made up a fake report, because it does say that they gave a bad report. But the people that wrote that never acknowledged what this says. So it says they were after the flood. How in the world did they survive the flood? Okay. Again, one of the arguments is they were just using hyperbole and just trying to scare people and trying to keep them from going into the promised land, which they did succeed in doing. And of course, they paid a big price for that. But I don't think that was going on. The problem is Genesis 6:4 says there were Nephilim after the flood. The question is, how did the Nephilim survive the flood? Who were they? Well, I'll give you a few hypotheses. Number one, the flood didn't kill all the Nephilim. Some people argue there's a myth story that Og, the king of Bashan, who's later killed by Moses, that he actually hung on the side of the boat and survived. We don't see that in Scripture anywhere. There's another argument that the flood was not global, that when Moses says it flooded the world, he was thinking of his world, and like the flood didn't flood Antarctica. Some of them may have survived that way. My only problem is theologically, God says, I will wipe out mankind whom I created, together with the animals that crawl on the birds of the sky, for I regret that I made him. I have decided to put an end to every creature. So I have a hard time believing the Nephilim somehow survived this. God over and over makes it clear that he's going to destroy every creature. So I think the Nephilim had to have been killed in the flood. So that brings us to another question. Another hypothesis. Another one is, well, the angels did it again. After the flood, they gave a second go-around. It's possible, but the Bible never tells us that. All we had was the sons of God pre-flood. We never read of the sons of God again post-flood. So that's pretty tenuous. The Bible doesn't really tell us that happened. I'm going to give you another hypothesis. I think Dolores and we were talking about this last week. And I lean on this one. The daughters-in-law of Moses, maybe they had corrupted DNA. Remember I told you last week that the Bible said Moses was blameless among his generation, and I believe that what that was pointing to was the first one said he was righteous. Then we have blameless, and I think the blameless was referring to the fact that he was not corrupted. His DNA, because I believe that's what the Nephilim were, was humans that were corrupted in their DNA. He was not corrupted. But we don't know about the daughters-in-law. We don't know where they came from. Is it possible? Now you're like, well, maybe they would have been like Amazon women, right? Because apparently these Nephilim were giants. Well, the Bible never refers to giants as females. It's always males who are the giants. So it's interesting that maybe for the females, they may have been carriers, but it was not necessarily seen. So I followed this hypothesis out, and we are running out of time. So you know what? You're going to have to wait till next week. Because the reason this is, we'll get to this next week. Because this explains to me a lot of what was going on with Joshua, with Moses, and ultimately David. And who they conquered and why they conquered them the way they conquered them. So you'll have to come back next week because I think it's going to add a layer of depth to something going on. Now, we still haven't gotten to Nephilim today. Are they around? Or if they're not, why does, again, God say, as it was in the days of Noah? Because if we're talking about a corrupted human race, then how would that be today? So maybe next week we'll get to that one too. And I will have more videos, but I will download them and put them in the slide presentation. Annika's giving me the thumbs up, so we won't have this craziness like we had tonight. So, Sure, I have lots of questions. Well, I mean, you mean, why would he allow Nephilim to survive? In other words, in the daughters-in-law? Mm-hmm. Well, again, the argument was he did kill all the Nephilim in the flood. But the daughters-in-law, and I think we can argue specifically one daughter-in-law, which you'll have to come back to next week, had a corrupted DNA, because that's what I would argue the Nephilim were. They were they were humans with a corrupted DNA, because these sons of God, these fallen angels, had mated with human women and corrupted human DNA, which created these giants, which is what they were known as, and very strong people. I mean, can you imagine if a 12-foot guy walked into this room? That would be terrifying. And do what? Yeah, he would have to duck to get in here. And we're going to talk about that next week, because there is a thing called giantism. And were these just people that had a thyroid condition, or was there something supernaturally going on in their DNA, something that was corrupted? But so God did kill all the Nephilim, but my argument is it's possible that one of the daughter-in-laws had a corrupted DNA, it would not have been known, because apparently this doesn't present themselves in women. It was only in men. So Noah would not have known, because, well, I'm not going to give it away. You're just going to have to read, because I think there's an argument to be made, and we're going to follow this out next week, that the Nephilim, largely post-flood, can be traced back to one of the sons of Noah. So we'll have to see that next week. So, but to answer your question, God does eventually wipe them out again. And I don't know if y'all were here the first week. One of the arguments I made was Jude and 2 Peter talk about these angels who are held in Tartarus in chains until the day of judgment. And I argued those were the angels that came and corrupted humanity. Because obviously there's still demons today. There's still fallen angels. But there was a group that crossed the line. And God immediately put them in hell and chains. So we'll look at that next week. So, and then we got to tie into, okay, but what does this have to do with today? Because when Jesus is coming back, it's supposed to be like the days of Noah. So is this happening today? We'll look at some interesting things you might find fascinating. All right. Well, we're tackling one of those passages most preachers just preach over and keep moving. It is a deep rabbit hole, but it's an interesting one. Sorry for the glitches tonight. Sorry for everybody watching. I will go back and probably edit this video and fix those glitches. All right. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord, your word is really so deep. Thousands of years later on the other side of the world, we get your basic truths, that we are sinners, we need a Redeemer, and Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and we believe that, and your word is sufficient for faith and practice. But Father, we also see that it appears there is a lot more depth that we just haven't really mined. And as we mine this, to me, Lord, it just makes it so much richer to understand what Jesus was doing, why he said what he did, where he went, and the proclamations he made. There was depth to these things and meaning behind these things. And Father, as we look into your word and the end days, Father, I think that you are revealing to us what we're starting to see in front of us. So, Father, thank you for everybody here tonight. Thank you for them putting up with me. And thank you for this time to just look into your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All righty. Well, next week we'll tackle this deeper. I'll try not to go down any more rabbit trails, but Mount Hermon was just fascinating. And all right, thanks for everybody watching. Next week we'll be back on a much better presentation. Annika, thank you for running around like a chicken with your head cut off. That's why we have a wireless keyboard. Someday we'll get all this synced, but got to figure out how to do that. Haven't had a chance to put the brain power to it. Yes, lower thirds would be nice.